Welcome in, y'all. Thanksgiving and week 13 are in the books. Let's start some power rankings. We're going to go through 6 tiers, talk about every single team, break it down, why each team is where, and what I think about them for the rest of this season. So we'll start in the bottom tier. These are just bad. These are bad teams. They've been bad all season long. The Jets, they got their third win this week. And, if I'm not mistaken, that's actually their third win in the last 5 games. Not beating anyone super impressive, but they are fighting to the end. They seem to have some decent stuff going. I don't really know where they go for their future. They've tried and failed at drafting a quarterback so many times, but eventually you need one. It's hard to just get one in free agency and have a ton of success, even though that's starting to become more of a popular trend. But they still have a lot of holes to fill. It's going to be a long offseason, but they need good drafts. But yeah, they belong down in this bottom tier. The Raiders, they had a pretty decent start to the season, and it's just been downhill from there. They've been really, really bad the last however many weeks. They're not close in a lot of games. They're just not playing good football. I thought this team would be bad. I didn't think they'd be quite this bad. This is a whole new low. Pete Carroll, just bad. Geno Smith, bad. It's just not good there in Vegas. Tennessee and New Orleans, both teams we kind of expected to be bad, and they are. They are exactly what we expected. They're both in full rebuilds. They're going to look to next year, try to figure out what they can do in the offseason to maybe take a small step next season. The Saints, they competed this week. They were losing most of the game. I can't say they deserved to be in it, but they made a late push and almost made the comeback there. They almost got that one done, but fell just short. That was certainly an interesting down the wire. Titans, we thought they'd build some momentum off of the Seattle game where they kept it close late, but they ended up getting blown out by the Jaguars in a relatively low-scoring affair. So, again, all 4 of these teams, not very good. All with their attention turned to next year, all kind of in rebuilds. And, rebuilds, as we've seen, some teams are successful at them, some aren't. Some teams like, the Jets have been trying to rebuild for over a decade and just can't. So we'll see which of these 4 teams can kind of successfully pull that off in these next couple of years. But let's go ahead and move up to the next tier now. And this is just a bad tier. They're not at the bottom. And by the way, this is recorded before Monday Night Football tonight, so the Giants game has not happened. But we'll start talking about the Vikings. I mean, disappointing is an understatement for this season. You win 14 games last year, and really the biggest thing you change is your quarterback, right? Sam Darnold for J.J. McCarthy. They made some roster changes, but really at the end of the day, it was a very, very similar team, a very good roster, similar to last season. And it's just a disaster this year. It's so bad. And the quarterback position has held this team back so much. They just can't get it going. And it really is brutal. I mean, J.J. McCarthy, it's time to move on. Wentz was hurt. Not that he was doing that great. The backup. It's just, I don't know what they're going to do there. I don't feel like they're that far away. This is a team that could use a soft rebuild, just shore up a couple positions, find you a good quarterback, and I think you're ready to compete again. But that is easier said than done. The Giants, this is a team that's here and bad almost only because they have 2 wins. They only have 2 wins at the time of making this, but man, have they been close in so many games. This team could have 6 or 7 wins, and they could be borderline competing for a playoff spot right now. They've just kept losing close games late in the game. Disappointing, but really it is a good sign for the future. You aren't going to, go on a Super Bowl run or anything this year. So in the grand scheme of things, in hindsight, getting a good draft pick and all that and building for next season is really going to be beneficial because I think, get a couple good draft picks, maybe a couple good free agent pickups. This team is closer to competing than you might think they are, given their record. So look out for the Giants next year, especially if Jackson Dart continues to play well and stay healthy. This team has a bright future ahead. The Cardinals, another team that's lost a bunch of close games this year. So many close games, a lot of them to very good teams. They're right there. And, I'm not a Cardinal fan, but it's got to be frustrating to be one. every year it seems like the roster is good enough to make a push, maybe make a playoff run, do a little something, build on it. And they just keep getting a very similar result year after year. And even the years they do start out good, they fall apart at the end. This team should be doing better. I don't know where the problem stems from, but they got to figure it out. It's so disappointing there for the Cardinals, and they should be better. They should be better than they are. Washington, a disappointing season. I've talked on this. Jaden Daniels' injury obviously has contributed to this poor season, but even when he was in, they struggled in several games. They got blown out a couple times with him, and it really comes from last season setting up expectations that just weren't attainable to repeat, right? They went 12-5 last year with a very easy schedule, and they had a lot of close wins, and that's just not going to happen again. They had a tougher schedule this year. They had injuries. They're not getting the close wins, and it's just a rough season. This is still a good team. I expect them to bounce back next year, but I think anyone who thought they were like elite heading into this year was just mistaken. The recipe last year really set up for them to get as many wins as they did. They went on a fun little playoff run, but it just wasn't that good of a team. Then Atlanta, disappointing for them as well. A disappointing season. This whole tier is full of disappointing teams. The Falcons really should have had a better season. They've had some close losses. They've lost some games maybe they shouldn't have. And, the talent is there, but it's just, I thought going into the year, I was low on the Falcons. And it was just something's missing. Something's off. I didn't trust Penix, honestly, to be honest, and Kirk Cousins isn't doing that great either. But this team should be better than they are. They really should be, and it's disappointing that their record is what it is. They just lost to the Jets this week. It's just brutal. A rough season, one to forget about there for the Falcons. And the worst part, they don't even have their first-round pick. It belongs to the Rams. So losing doesn't even do them any good, which is unfortunate. But I think the future is bright there. They have a lot of good pieces, a lot of good young pieces. They should be able to build and create a good foundation there in Atlanta. Cleveland, you could throw them in the bottom tier, but I think they belong here because of how good that defense is. They're not going to win a bunch of games, but the games they've won this year have been impressive. They've stayed close against some good teams as well, even in some of the losses. Again, thanks to the defense. But this team has a ways to go. They have a ways to go. They're probably at the bottom of this tier, and they're going to look to continue to keep adding pieces next season. But that defense is very good and definitely something to build off of. Now, tier 4. Not bad, not great. Kind of a small one here, but I only had a couple teams to include. You have the Bengals, a tough team to place. Joe Burrow comes back, and they're now 3-0 with Burrow. But I can't just forget the amount of times the Bengals scored, 30, 40 points this season and lost because of the defense. They were forcing turnovers against Baltimore, which is great. Burrow looked good. But can we keep that up? If they can, who knows? If they win out, there's a decent chance they make the playoffs, which is crazy. If they went out, all they need to happen is they would pass Baltimore by winning out, and they would pass Pittsburgh if Pittsburgh just lost twice. And Pittsburgh, again, next on this list, Pittsburgh's been shaky, and the schedule's not easy. They play Baltimore twice. Honestly, they'll be underdogs in both. They also play at Detroit. Honestly, odds are they do lose at least 2. So Cincinnati probably controls their own destiny here, which is crazy. Good for them. That'd be crazy. Certainly be interesting to see how this plays out. But I'm not going to forget how bad the defense has been. Pittsburgh, it's Pittsburgh, right? They're good enough to have a decent record, but they're not good enough to go win the big games, to go on a playoff run, win a playoff game. They might sneak in and win the division at 9-8 or something, and if they do, I expect them to be a wild card out. This team they're not a bad team. They've beaten some decent teams, but they are far from great. They're not going on a playoff run. They're stuck in purgatory. It's tough for the Steelers. The Dolphins, really just hurt by how rough of a start they had to the season, because they're playing better football now. The Saints made it closer than the game was down the stretch, and they had a little scare there. If the Dolphins win out, there's a chance they make the playoffs. There's a chance. They'd have to get a wild card bid because they're not catching the Patriots. But at 10-7, it'd probably come down to some tiebreakers, and I'd have to go look at it. I'm not sure what those how those would work out in the Dolphins' favor or against their favor, but there's definitely a chance. But I don't expect them to win out. They don't have an easy schedule. So we'll see. But they're playing better football. They looked bad for a few weeks there, and they've lost some close games against some good teams. So maybe not as bad as people think with this Dolphins team. And we're going to go ahead and jump into the next tier then. And I call this tier just outside, right? And that means something different for a lot of these teams. And I'll go one by one, of course, explaining. The Buccaneers, they should still win the division. It's going to be close, though. The Buccaneers they're struggling. Panthers, they just got a big win this week. They're right on the Bucs' tail. So, they can't write them out. They still play each other 2 times. But the Bucs are really it's been this way for a couple years. They're good enough to be a good team, to make the playoffs, maybe win a playoff game. But they're just outside of being like a contender. Like they're above the Steelers in like purgatory levels. Like they're a step ahead of the Steelers, but they're still stuck. They're just outside of really being able to compete, and I think it's going to be similar this year. I think they're going to get that 4 seed. And you know what? They could win at home. This team is good enough. They could win whoever they play, considering it's a home playoff game at home against, probably whoever doesn't win the NFC West, Seattle or LA. They could win that game. I'm not sure I'd pick them to, but they could. And then they'd probably lose on the road the next week. So just outside of really being a contender, the Cowboys, man, the last couple of weeks, they seem better than this. They've played great football. They just beat both of the conference champions from last year in a span of like 4 days. 2 close games, but they look good. 2 good home wins. And now, you know what? They probably control their destiny. If they went out, they're probably in the playoffs. So can they do it? They have a huge one this week. Cowboys play the Lions this week. The loser of that game, they're in trouble. They're in big trouble. And the winner, all of a sudden, it's more all of a sudden for the Cowboys. The Lions, they were kind of in the playoff race. They're fading. But if the Cowboys get a win against the Lions, all of a sudden it's like, you know what? I think they're going to make the playoffs. That'd be crazy for them to sneak in after the start of the season, after the offseason drama. I mean, it'd be crazy to see them sneak in. So we'll see. They're playing good football right now. That Thursday night game is going to be a blast. I'm so looking forward to that. It's going to be so much fun. Carolina, just outside of, I don't even know how to explain this team. They have a winning record by some miracle. They have a winning record. And, man, I hate to say it, but I'm going to continue to doubt them. I still don't think they're that good. I think they've proven, which this is an important thing to have in a team, they've proven they can step up and beat top-tier opponents, which they have several times this year, including this week. They beat the Rams. A great performance by the Panthers. But this is a team, put them against anyone in the playoffs, in a playoff game, I'm picking against the Panthers. I don't think they'll make it. I think the Bucs are going to just beat them out. But we'll see. I hope they prove me wrong again, because I love when teams that haven't been good get good. It's very fun. It's very entertaining. I root for them. So I hope the Panthers get in. It'd be awesome to see them win the division, host a playoff game. I'd be there for it. I'm rooting for them. I just doubt them a little bit. We'll see how it goes. The Lions, it's been a rough season. Week 1, it was 0-0, and then they had a few weeks of like, oh, they might be the best team in the league, and then a few more weeks, and it's like, wait a second, what the heck's going on here? This team has problems. They kind of go back and forth, though, to be fair. But the last few weeks, it's been on the problem side. They're losing games. They just keep dropping games. They're not playing that well. They're not playing horribly, though. That's the thing. It's not like they're out here getting blown out by good teams. They're putting up good fights. They're close games. But they just keep losing. They keep finding ways to just fade out of it. The failed 4th down conversions are a big part of it. They've been horrible on 4th downs in their losses. And I know it's Dan Campbell's thing, and he's going to ride or die with it. And I respect it. I respect that. But it's hurting them right now, because this is a solid football team, mind you, with a lot of injuries. Injuries have really hurt this team. Mon-Ra is now out for a couple weeks. They have some offensive line issues, some secondary issues. I just think it's one of those years. It's just not their year. Maybe they get healthy, barely sneak into the playoffs and go on a miracle run, but I think it's just not their year. It's unfortunate stuff, adjusting to the loss of the coordinators, the injuries, the schedule is brutal. Stuff just is lined up against them. They still have a chance. Like I said, they're still a good team, still well coached. If they can sneak into the playoffs and get some players back, they're dangerous. This is a very, very good football team, but things just aren't going their way right now. And then we'll move on to Baltimore. And yeah, so I picked, one of my locks this week was Cincinnati to cover against the Ravens. And in that video, I said, since Lamar came back, or, a game or two before he came back when they started this winning streak, I was like, Baltimore's getting too much credit right now. They're on this winning streak, but they're not beating anyone that's good. And they're barely beating some bad teams. They barely beat the Browns. The Jets gave them a game. And I'm like, we think back to earlier this season, the Baltimore team that gave up a late comeback against the Bills, the Baltimore team that got killed against the Chiefs. This team, when you look at the big picture, just might not be that good. And I'm starting to have concerns about them, because this was one you can't lose. You win this one with the way the Steelers are playing, and considering it's against the Bengals, you start to wrap up the division, but all of a sudden you are in a dogfight to win this division, and I don't trust anyone in there right now. So we'll see how it goes with the Ravens. They're slacking a little bit. Now moving on to the Chiefs. What on earth is going on this year, right? Last year they went 12-0 in one-score games, and that's coming back. They are losing close game after close game, and they are on the outside looking in. Not only are they on the outside looking in, but they do not have the tiebreaker against like 3 different teams that they might be fighting for a wild card spot with. So, that is brutal. They're in a tough spot. This Chiefs team, with that loss on Thanksgiving, it's real. It's real now, where it's like they might not make the playoffs. For weeks, it was like, okay, they're going to figure it out, right? They're going to get a win. They're going to go on a run. The heck, they might even win the division. But now it's like alarm bells. This is a real problem. They have real problems now. They're home on Sunday night this week against the Texans. They're only 3.5-point favorites. That's a huge game for both teams. The loser, is in trouble, right? I think it means actually more to the Chiefs. The Texans actually have a better record. If the Chiefs lose that game, is it safe to say they might be done with 7 losses, not having the tiebreaker against the Texans, the Jags, the Bills, currently the Chargers? Is it safe to say they're done? That'd be crazy. But wow, this Chiefs team is in trouble. But speaking of Chiefs-Texans, let's talk about the Texans next on this list. The Texans are playing darn good football right now. They're winning against good teams. The defense is elite. It's top tier. The offense is doing just enough, and this Texans team is once again dangerous. This is a dangerous Texans team. They are 1 game back of the division lead, and if they can get Jacksonville to drop just 1 more game, the Texans control their own destiny. It could come down to Week 18, Colts at Texans, winner takes division. That's going to be awesome, and the Texans have battled back. I respect the heck out of them for it. They started 0-3, and it's been fun to watch them claw back, especially on the back of a really good defense. You don't see that as much in modern NFL. It's been a lot of fun. And if they can go into Kansas City and win this week, all bets are off, right? Because I think, I don't know. I was going to say I think people expect them to lose that game, but the way the Chiefs are playing and the way the Texans are playing, maybe not. We'll see, but that's a big one there. But let's jump up to Tier 2 here. We got, just great. And it, again, means different things for different teams. It's hard to pinpoint every team in the same tier, but we'll start with the 49ers, a team that you could argue could be up a tier. You could argue that. I believe they're 9-4 without checking. I believe that is their record. But I don't trust this team. I don't think they are super elite. However, they're incredibly well coached. They have several playmakers that have been there before. And if they get in the dance, which they probably will at this point, they are as big a threat as anyone just because of how they play playoff football. They have gotten wins they shouldn't have before in the playoffs. Shanahan knows how to coach. Purdy has proven serviceable. And they got a decent team there. They have a lot of injuries, which is why I don't trust them, right? I'd probably still pick against them in a lot of playoff games against most NFC opponents, NFC playoff opponents. But you never know with this team. This team is still dangerous. Moving on to the next up, Philadelphia, and oh no, do we have a full-blown breakdown that we had a couple years ago for the Eagles? Like for the Eagles, it's like we're either going to go to the Super Bowl or we're going to have just a collapse from the inside. The offense can't do anything for this team, and they're finding ways to lose games right now. It's 2 rough weeks in a row. I don't trust the Eagles one bit right now. They have a lot of problems, and some teams, when they have problems, it's good. They need to face some adversity, they battle back, and they work it out. But the Eagles are not a team that responds to problems well. They're a team that has proven that locker room implodes. And I'm scared of this team as far as what's going to happen to them. They have all the talent in the world. Talent-wise, they are easily a Super Bowl contender. But I don't know what's going on in that locker room right now. It's not good. They're at the Chargers this week, this upcoming Monday night, and I think that's going to tell us a lot. Can they figure it out? Can they rebound? Can they go on the road and get a win in a game that should be tight? But realistically, given injuries, given just straight-up rosters, I would think the Eagles would have the edge. We'll see how that one goes. But speaking of the Chargers, funny enough, they are next. Good win. They're coming out of a bye. They get a win. And not too much to talk about here. This is a team that they scare me, right? They have losses to the Commanders, to the Giants, to the Jaguars. And I just don't know how good they are. They also have some good wins as well. But I think this is one of those teams that's good. They're well coached. You have Herbert, a great quarterback, so they can definitely sneak up on some teams, go on a run. But when push comes to shove, I don't trust them, and there's a lot of teams I'd take over them in the AFC at the moment. Next up, the Colts, and they're fading, unfortunately. I was hyped. Again, I've said it before. I like teams when they haven't been good in a minute, and they're starting to do well, and that the Colts fall in that category. But all of a sudden, they're sitting in second in their division, and it's just a tough couple weeks. A loss to the Chiefs in a very close game where they had the lead, and then a close loss to the Texans. They were driving, couldn't get it done. The missed extra point that they called good, that's a whole thing that I won't get into. But, now it's time. It's time. If this team is as good as they were, seemed to be earlier in the year, it's time to start playing good football. They're at Jacksonville this week, and the winner will be leading the division after this week, and it is crucial they win that game. If they lose that game, they're in trouble of not only not winning the division, but all of a sudden missing the playoffs. So we'll see what they can do there, but I hope they can do well. But moving on, it's the Buffalo Bills, and I don't know with this team right now. I mean, they're a good football team, but they've showed some really big flaws at times this season. They haven't looked good at times. They've looked really good at times, don't get me wrong. They honestly didn't look good for a half of football against the Steelers. Mind you, they doubled their yardage, so, they were still playing well, but they just couldn't find ways to punch it in. And, coming off of that Texans game where they couldn't get the offense going, that was a bit stressful. But then Aaron Rodgers gets the injury, Buffalo gets the strip sack touchdown, and really it's a snowball effect. The Bills win the game. The Bills are right now, they're going to be on the road in the playoffs. I understand that, but just given Josh Allen, given their experience, they'd almost be the team I rely on the most in the AFC just because there's so many unknowns. If the Chiefs miss the playoffs, it's like the rest of the teams in there, who do you rely on? Right now it's maybe the Bills, but they've been so shaky this year. The AFC is really just wide open. So who knows there. But let's move on to the Jacksonville Jaguars making their way up slowly but steadily, making their way up. Another good win this week. They are now technically, via tiebreaker, in first place in the AFC South, and good for them. This is a team that has played quietly good football for most of the season. The offense has had its speed bumps. Trevor Lawrence has not played super great this season. But man, the way the rest of the team is playing, if Trevor Lawrence could get going, this could be a really good team. So we'll see. I already mentioned it with the Colts. They have a huge game against the Colts this week. If they can win that, win this division, and get a good seed, all of a sudden, are we talking about the Jaguars potentially making a run? Who knows? But good for them. Good for the Jaguars. But let's move on up to the top tier, and I've called this tier just currently elite. Keyword on currently, because I'm not necessarily saying these are the 6 best teams in football. I'm saying right now, these teams currently are playing at an elite level, or they're just getting wins, they're piling them up. It's currently. We'll start with the Rams, a brutal loss, right? You had the first seed, the number 1 seed, basically just staring you in the eye, and you just had to not have a trap game like that. And they go and lose in Carolina in the pouring rain, not ideal there. The offense was playing well for the Rams, and this was reminiscent of their 49er loss earlier in the season. The Rams have 3 losses now, and those 3 losses were against the Eagles, where they got 2 fourth-quarter field goals blocked, then against the Niners, where they had like 3 or 4 turnovers in the red zone, one of those on downs, and then this one against Carolina, two picks, a fumble in the red zone, or two turnovers, like inside the 30, about to score. So right now, the biggest concern is they got to stop beating themselves. It's like if they just don't have a blow-up game where they're just making these insane mistakes, then it seems like they win easily. But, you got to get through the playoffs. One game like that, you're done, no matter how good the rest of your team is. So they're still a really good team. They're still kind of heavily, believe it or not, the Super Bowl favorite as far as sports books go, the betting odds. And I think this team is still very good, but they have to avoid those big mistakes. I will say their run defense was a bit shaky against Panthers. Panthers were running the ball against them. I know the Panthers have ran on a lot of teams this year, but for a team that's kind of had an improved run defense this year, that was concerning to see the Rams give up so much on the ground. The Panthers were kind of having their way there, so the Rams better shore that up before these next couple weeks. But they still have a good chance at the 1 seed. And, their game at Seattle in a couple weeks is going to be a blast. That's a Thursday night one. I'll talk more about that when we get to the Seahawks. Moving on, though, the Denver Broncos. And they're kind of up here by default, right? They, first in the AFC based on, record and whatnot. But this team has won a lot of very, very close games against some very bad teams. However, they've also beaten the Chiefs. They've also beaten the Eagles. So, if they're going to play it close against every team, but also the good teams and find ways to win, then I guess I'll give them their credit. This is still a team I'm not going to sit there and trust, and I'm not saying they're a Super Bowl favorite out of the AFC, but if they can find ways to keep winning close games with a defense that's that good, who knows? Who knows? But this team just concerns me with how many close wins they're getting against bad teams. But you know what? They're finding ways to win. There's something to that, and credit to them. They keep cruising, and it looks like the AFC West is going to be theirs. Really, the only threat right now is the Chargers. Moving on to the Patriots, they play tonight, so I don't know if they're going to win or lose. They're 7.5-point favorites, so you'd assume they would win. I think the Giants might give them a game, but they've played great this year. They haven't played a very difficult schedule, mind you, so it's hard to give them too much credit yet, but something about stacking up wins against bad teams, and they've been doing it, in big ways for a lot of the games. They've been winning, by large margins, and they went into Buffalo and got a win. That's a big one there. So, they're playing good, and right now, they're slated to get a number 1 or number 2 seed, and, it would take a lot for them to lose this division. It would probably take a loss tonight, honestly. So we'll see, but yeah, Patriots, Foxborough, looks like it's going to be hosting its first playoff game since Tom Brady and the Patriots lost to the Titans in that 2019 wildcard matchup. Moving on to the next team, though, we have the Chicago Bears. And this is a new addition here. I'd been doubting them. And, I feel like rightfully so. They really hadn't played anybody. They hadn't beaten anybody. They played some teams and they got blown out by them. But they really hadn't beaten anybody. This week they go into Philadelphia and get a big win. And you know what? I think they deserve their respect for that. They're currently first in the NFC. And they're a threat, I still don't think this is one of the best teams in the NFC necessarily. And I think that the books reflect that. They're still 6.5-point underdogs this week against the Packers. So, I mean, yeah, the Bears still have a bit to go. I think they might be a year too early, but you never know. You never know. I mean, they were killing the Eagles on the ground. The defense is playing well. Those are recipes for success. And you got Ben Johnson who can cook up a good offense there. So Bears are doing good things. If they can find a way to somehow, it's a tough schedule, though. If they can find a way to get the 1 seed, I mean, who knows? You could see Chicago in the Super Bowl. That'd be nuts, especially coming into this year, what we thought about them. But, it's a tough schedule. They play the Packers twice. They play the Lions. They play at the 49ers. So those are 4 tough games there. So it's definitely not a gimme. They have a lot of work to be done. They're still underdogs to win the division, believe it or not. The Packers are the favorites to win the NFC North. So the Bears, they could make another statement this week. If they go into Green Bay and get a win, I think there's no doubt the Bears are the favorite to win the division then, and they will have 100% respect from, I would assume, most people at that point. But this team's playing well. I like to see it. Bears have been bad for a little bit, and I'm rooting for them. I like to see them do good things. Seattle, they only one loss over the last, 10 weeks or so, it feels like, and that one was to the Rams. But they bounced back well. They played well against the Titans. The Titans made it closer than it should have been. And then this week, they just had their way with the Vikings. The Seattle offense couldn't punch it in the end zone. I think they only ended up scoring 1 touchdown. They had a ton of field goals. But the defense was just elite. It was next level, like we expected it to be. They're playing against a third-string quarterback over there in Minnesota. And Seattle was just a better team, and they did what they were supposed to do. This Seattle team is absolutely dangerous, and since the loss of the Rams, I don't think they're getting talked about enough. This is a team that is still on a path for the 1 seed. If they win out, including a win, they're at home against the Rams. If they win that game and win the rest of their games, this team is probably the 1 seed in the NFC and probably the team to beat in the NFC. I believe they're currently 2nd in Super Bowl odds right now. So, I think Seattle deserves a bit more respect, a bit more talked about. I think the talk has come down a bit from them over the last couple weeks, but maybe it ramps back up. This is a very, very good and a very, very dangerous Seattle Seahawks team. Green Bay is the last one on this list, and I don't know exactly how I feel about them because they just seem to fall really flat at times, but this is a team that is well coached. They have an elite defense. The pieces are an elite offense. They could use a bit better receivers, but still really solid there. Jordan Love is very good. He's not like elite, but he's definitely good enough that you could win a Super Bowl with this team. And they just went into Detroit, got a nice win there. I mean, this is a good Packers team. They're playing well the last couple weeks. And if they can win over Chicago this week, they'll be in line to win the NFC North, hosting a playoff game. This is definitely a team capable of going to win the Super Bowl, and I think they're playing elite football right now. So that kind of concludes all the teams for the week. Let me know what y'all think. What would you change up and down? Everyone always disagrees. Everyone always thinks their team is higher. But I'm definitely open to hearing it, like seeing what people think, and every now and then I hear something that I didn't even consider myself. So I would love to hear from y'all, and it's been a great week of football. This past week was a fun one, a lot of upsets, and I hope this upcoming week is just as fun. Looking forward to another fantastic week of football.